for players that are maybe coming around to solo guitar kind of early on that journey. I'm asking this because I know you're also a teacher. Like, what do you recommend as far as it's a technical stuff or just headspace stuff? If somebody comes to you and says, "I'm really curious about solo guitar, but I don't know where to start," like, what do you usually tell students at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think with everything else, my first answer is usually listen, just start by listening. And whether I think one of the beautiful things, one of the many beautiful things about solo guitar is that it's wide open in how you approach it. It's not like there's just one way. If you want this, then you must do this, this, and this. You can, I mean, if you want to play solo guitar, there are so many different ways of doing it. I think infinite, really. And ultimately, that will be influenced by your thinking and all of the other things that you listen to. But to give one example, if you want to approach solo guitar with kind of a full orchestral way, meaning multiple parts. And that was something that really attracted me to solo guitar initially, because I had been listening to a lot of fingerstyle acoustic players, but then also a lot of, solo jazz players like Tuck Andrus and Earl Klugh and Lenny Breau, and they had a very full approach to that. That's just one way of playing solo guitar, but that's how I got into it. And when I first started listening to it, it just seemed impossible. Like I was like, well, how are they getting all of those parts happening? I just don't understand. And so for me, it was just listening to those recordings over and over again. And after a while, it kind of becomes a part of your subconscious. So you can hear that it's not only possible, but your ears just start to hear that. Even at the surface level, you're hearing maybe a moving bass line and you're hearing some chords in there. And gradually over time, what seems to be just straight up impossible starts to, it doesn't seem as foreign anymore, or like, it just becomes more relatable. And so that's what I did. Like every night I would kind of go to sleep with like a little Walkman. I had a tape cassette, and I listened to Earl Klugh's solo guitar record over and over again, and Tuck Andrus's Reckless Precision, and then his Christmas holiday record over and over again. And then for me, I got into other classic guitar recordings later. Like later I listened to Virtuoso, and later I listened to Barney Kessel, solo guitar, and everybody has kind of gotten into that. But I was initially attracted by the way that fingerstyle players approached, because they were able to get all of those different parts. So that's how my concept was formed. And I would say in addition to that, when I was first getting into it, I listened to a lot of piano players, solo recordings. So for example, Oscar Peterson's recording, My Favorite Instrument. And, everybody kind of associates Oscar Peterson with just being this burning, like the chops and the Art Tatum and the full neck.
Athletic kind of, yeah.
Right. Which of course he is, and swings and stuff, but he's such an incredible ballad player. And when you listen to him play ballad, especially his solo piano recordings, it's his voicings and his depth and his nuance and dynamics are just beautiful. And so he was a big influence. Marcus Roberts, Bill Evans, Thelonious Monk, all of their solo recordings were just, I just loved. It was like a different way for them to express themselves. And so I don't want to go on forever about this, but for me, there was something, the chamber aspect of playing the guitar, for example, that I was really attracted to. And so what I mean by that, right about the same time in my life, so you and I are basically the same age, right? So at that time, straight ahead wasn't really popular. I mean, no one was playing like straight ahead bebop in the late 80s and early 90s, right?
Well, Winton, and then that was about it.
Yeah, right. It wasn't. It wasn't kind of. I mean, I guess it was. Maybe it had its resurgence in the mid '90s, but certainly for this time in my life, kind of jazz guitar was Pat Metheny, Mike Stern, John Scofield, more fusion,
of course.
Which I love that, and I liked playing that. But what I felt was, is that with all that sound and volume and everything, it kind of narrowed me artistically. Like you play with a pick, and you got to play lines, and they're always got to be at this level, and then you comp, and that's kind of, I just felt that to be limiting after a while.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
So playing guitar with my fingers and then the solo context gave me the opportunity to explore the guitar in a lot of different ways that I felt weren't possible when you're playing in, for example, a quartet or a quintet with a sax player and a loud rhythm section.
Right. Right. Yeah, the kind of when you have multiple parts and contrary lines and stuff on the guitar, a lot of that stuff would get lost, I think, in a group. Like if I'm thinking of like Schofield with his quartet records with Joe Lovano, or what's that great record that he made with Joe Henderson, So Near, So Far?
Yeah, the musings for Miles of the Miles record. Oh,
Yeah.
so incredible.
Right. And of course it's still so nuanced what he's doing. But yeah, the level of stuff you're talking about with fingerstyle guitar doesn't necessarily translate into that kind of setting. I am curious though, because I started when I knew we were going to talk, I started listening to River Coffee, which is a record that I had not heard before. When I met you, I think it was more around the My Fair Lady record, and I heard some stuff on there that sounded more like fingerstyle acoustic guitar, not necessarily jazz players. So I'm curious, like you mentioned, the jazz guys like Earl Klug and Tuck Andrus, and then on the piano side as well. But I'm curious if there are some acoustic guitar players that you were into, especially at that point early on, that you'd want to mention, because I think I bet you some of the names would surprise me and even some of the guys on Patreon.
Yeah, sure. So when I was young, I had the good fortune of seeing actually a lot of people, which is surprising when I look back at it because I'm from Maine. But a lot of people, believe it or not, kind of came through there occasionally. And one of them was Chet Atkins. And I saw him, and it was just kind of mind-blowing in the sense that there was so much music coming out of just one guitarist. And that made a big impression on me when I was young. And right around the same time, I had a teacher, like in 8th grade, I think it was, that made me a cassette of Segovia and on John Williams. And it was just kind of mind-blowing in that, like, wow, this is such a complete musical picture. And how are they doing that? And I never studied classical guitar, but I have always had this, peripheral appreciation of and love for classical guitarists and Brazilian guitarists later on, and African fingerstyle guitarists. And so over the years, I was really into the Windham Hill players such as Michael Hedges and Alex DeGrassi, Leo Kottke, that 6 and 12 string guitar album.
So good.
So it's just, I just loved it. And I love acoustic music too. And I love the acoustic guitar as an instrument. And so I've always really listened to a lot of different styles of music. I love folk music. I love Irish music. I love, just all kinds of styles. And so that the way that those types of folks, like Paul Simon, for example, the way that he would just play with his fingers was just really appealing to me. And the sensibilities, I think, technically and harmonically of somebody like Alex DeGrassi was really appealing to me, because they were using all of these sophisticated techniques and harmony. And I think what sets those players, in my mind, apart from the slapper tappers, I think a lot of people call them, the current, fingerstyle, was their compositional sensibilities. Michael Hedges as a composer, Alex DeGrassi as a composer, they were playing the same with the same harmonic sensibilities that I loved about jazz, but they weren't playing changes. They were just doing something different with it. And then later on, Cacho Terral and Luis Bonfa, all those Brazilian guitarists,
Yeah, I know Luis Bonfa's name, but who was the first one you said?
There's an Argentinian guitarist, Cacho Terral, and Yeah, I think he was kind of under the radar. His recordings are hard to find, but again, somebody made me like a mixtape, literally, of his playing. It was just beautiful. Very similar to a lot of these, like Rafael Rebello and you know, now Yamandu and Ginga, of course, and so yeah, I mean, it's just the ability to play all of that stuff. You know, in a solo way, really. And, you know, Adam, actually, one of the biggest groups that has been kind of ongoing influence for me was Take Six, the Acapella Group. And I just love the way that singers would kind of thread their voices and guitar players. It's hard to do that, right? Like a piano player would, or if you were writing for voices, obviously. So I think there are very few people that are exploring like the contrapuntal nature of the guitar that's possible. Julian certainly is. You know, there are a lot of people that are starting to do that. And even on social media right now, on Facebook, you might be hip to that Jimmy Weibel group that Beth Marlis has been. There's so much stuff there to get into. It's amazing.
Yeah.